Accident victims like you deserve better. A husband and wife were rear-ended, and insurance offered them $10,000. We litigated the case and got them $375,000. Qualified expert attorneys can get you more. Call Zirkin and Smerling today.
Good evening, Baltimore City. Welcome to City Voters Live Podcast. I'm your host, Desmond Stinney, back for part 3 of the MCB trilogy. Part 1 featured the exclusive interview with P. David Bramble. And if you missed that, there's an opportunity to see that on Baltimore City Voters. Really compelling 41 minutes that I got to spend with the principal over there at MCB. Very impressive. I hope you get a chance to look at that. Part 2 was yesterday. We went over the legislative package with the councilman from the 11th district, Eric Costello, and had a couple of panelists that joined us. Klaus Phillipson, cool as a cucumber, very informative, very insightful, and the ever fiery David Tafaro, who I just met for the first time yesterday and enjoyed it thoroughly. Also provided some great insight and some good content and information for for voters and the people of Baltimore City. Tonight we have with us some team members from MCB, and we have Adam, Jen. I'll give them an opportunity to each introduce themselves and talk about what they do. And we also have Claire Augrey as well as Gabe Altieri. And you guys figured out who's going first.
Why don't you go ahead, Gabe?
All right. Desmond, thank you so much for having us here tonight. My name's Gabe Altieri. I actually I don't work for MCB. I have a consultancy called Just Economy. And one of the things that we do is community engagement, public engagement around large-scale real estate development projects. And I speak from experience when I say I have never seen a community engagement process quite like this one. So I'm excited to talk about that tonight.
Great. My name is Claire Augrey. I'm a landscape architect, and I also don't work for MCB. I have my own practice. We're called Unknown Studio, and I'm one of 3 founding partners. And we've spent about 20 years of our lives working in predominantly public space, public parks, creation of new urban realms and urban destinations all across the world.
And I'm Adam Jen. I'm the Vice President of MCB Harborplace. Pleased to be with you here tonight, as well as this amazing team that we have that's brought to bear for Baltimore City. My job is on behalf of MCB Real Estate to administer the Harborplace project, and that's working with this team on community engagement, our design team, and then ultimately working through the design process with the City of Baltimore to hopefully create a great project for downtown.
Excellent. Thank you guys for those introductions. I think they'll be very helpful for people to understand, as we go through tonight. And tonight, what I've heard in parts 1 and 2 of these interviews is the level of community engagement. Dave talked quite a bit about that, as well as Councilman Costello, described, yesterday for us the level of engagement that has been performed, by your team. And I think the next stage, of this process is to really talk about, how that engagement drove, the plan, what actually people got to see in October, and I think it's important for people to understand that. How much that effort that you put into it really played into, and we're not talking about, people saying explicitly, we want to see this or that, but just how that feedback, that whole process that you went through from questions that you asked, answers that you got, back to the team. What does that look like if we could put it all together as an actual real estate plan? And I think, once people can see how that, process, went for you and your team, I think they'll get a better understanding of, what they're seeing, as the actual plan. So tonight, I'm the guide, so I'll take instruction. We're going to keep this really informal tonight, and we'll throw the phone number up on the screen here. For anyone that's viewing tonight, there'll be a number on the screen that you can call in and ask questions about whatever it is you're seeing, and we'll do our best to get you squared away as far as an answer. But I think you guys tell me who's going to lead or whatever. Just tell me what slide to put up or where you want to start. Maybe it's about how you implemented the engagement process, and then we'll get to what the results of it was kind of at the end.
Yeah, that sounds great. So we started working with Dave and MCB in roughly July of 22. Early on, before the receivership process was finalized, when MCB was really thinking about, is this a project that we want to take on? And we met with Dave, and I think a lot of times we as community engagement, as a community engagement team, we get put in a position where we're asked to stand between the community and the developer and take a lot of arrows. We hate doing that. We don't get a lot of opportunities to ask the community what they want. But community engagement for us isn't about taking a vote. It's not about doing a poll. There will be plenty of time for folks to vote in November, and folks will have the opportunity to vote on whether they want this proposal to happen. But it's really about gathering as many inputs as we can, gathering as many ideas as we can. And to do that right, we've got to ask questions like, how do you want to feel when you're at Harborplace? What do you want to show your family and your friends when they come visit Baltimore from wherever for Thanksgiving or Christmas or any holiday? And so getting those kinds of questions. And so when people say, I didn't hear anyone say they wanted residential at a community engagement session, that's because we're not taking a vote at community engagement sessions. We're trying to get to the deeper understanding, the deeper meaning behind what people say they want to experience or see or feel, or be able to do or be able to show off.
And that's the key word there, experience. What do you want to experience? Mm-hmm. What do you want your day to be like when you think, I'm going to get up today and I'm going to go to the harbor? That's really what it's all about, right? The experience.
Right.
Yeah. And, I would say Dave really challenged the team with doing something different from how this is normally done. And as Gabe alluded to, and as Dave would jokingly say, I think he did when he was with you last week, typically if we're going to do a Home Depot somewhere, we draw the Home Depot, we take it to the community, we fight about parking and traffic.
Right.
But Harborplace is very different from that. And so Dave made a promise to the city of Baltimore, to the elected officials in the city and the state, and said, I will go anywhere and meet with anyone because it's that important to hear from every corner of the city. And I think we've accomplished that.
Yeah.
I think Gabe and the Just Economy team have run an amazing process that is still ongoing. It's important to note that, we had an input phase where we were taking in all these ideas through big meetings and small meetings and, myriad different avenues for input. And then ultimately we released a set of plans, which is now providing the opportunity for feedback. And that's where we are today is, we just did a survey for folks. We have upcoming meetings. And, I think it's really important to note that we're a long way from putting a shovel in the ground. And so we have, as a city, have the opportunity to really influence what gets created here.
Yeah. Right. And that's with anything. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm going through a furniture store and I see this couch. Like, oh, it's beautiful. They show me the price. I'm like, oh my God. I can't believe you would charge that much.
My old couch is all right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's, anytime it's change or something's new, there's that sticker shock, but that wears off, right? Mm-hmm. That's the initial response. That's the emotional response. And at some point, hopefully you get down to a point where you're having substantive, logical conversations, right? And that's what we're interested in at City Voters Live. That's why when we saw, as this started to play out in October, we thought it was very, very important that we do everything we can to get involved, to have these long form discussions about what's happening, what the vision is, what was the process, and the rationale. And as you start to have those, I think people will begin to understand a little bit better about what's going on. And we're not media. We're a civic organization, for lack of a better description, right? We're not going to, we're not limited to 2 or 3 minutes, because we're covering things that is in Columbia and Bel Air and everywhere else. Right. We're Baltimore City, and we're a Baltimore City group, right? And our goal is to have long form discussions that are 40 minutes to an hour, unless you have spirited guys like Dave DeFaro that take you 90 minutes, which I appreciate that, Dave. I've really had a good time with you, and I can't wait to get you back on. But either way, we try not to limit. We don't have any limits to how much resources we want to spend to cover things that really matter to Baltimore. So with that said, I want you to take your time, relax. This is completely informal. Take us through whatever it is you want the people of Baltimore and the voters of Baltimore to know about the work that you've done.
So I think we should start with one quick framing thought, and then run through the presentation, the design presentation, and some of the renderings and images that we've got, and then we can take questions and take calls.
Okay.
But one thing that I do want to just lead with is to Adam's and Dave's joke about when we build a Home Depot, we drop what we want to build, and then we go fight with the community about it. And I think that's their perspective on it. My perspective on it is a lot of times groups call me to go fight about it. And so very early on, I think it was like day one of working with MCB, we said, Dave, what's on the table? You want us to be out in the community, getting input, getting ideas. You want us to build this process that's the biggest process that's ever been run. What's on the table? If we go to them and we say, let's think big, but you know what you're going to do, it's not going to feel good. It's not going to be engaging. It's not going to be inclusive. And so Dave said, there's really only a couple of guardrails here. It's got to work. Like, we can't be back in this same spot with two decrepit, falling apart buildings in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. We've got to be building for 50 to 100 years. And so it's got to be economically viable. It's got to be economically sustainable. It's got to work long term. Make it resilient, make it accessible. And all of these came from that very early conversation. And then when we were speaking with members of the community, it's what we heard from them time and time again. And it I think is the biggest finding of I think it's our second community engagement report, is when we meet with folks across the city, they resoundingly want these same kinds of things. And how we get there, we've got a lot of discussion on that. We've had a lot of discussion, and we're going to keep that conversation going. But we want accessibility, connectivity to the water. We want it to be economically viable long term. Right. But those were Dave's guardrails from day one, and really whatever could fit within that framework was on the table.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
Which, working in the public realm for about 20 years, Boston and New York and Miami, when I started in this field, I think even my mom was sort of saying this, like, what a wonderful job to make parks, and it'll be all hugs, warm hugs all the time. This is our shared public realm, and so therefore it is one of the most fraught parts of the design industry, because people care so much and because we have to share it. So that said, I've been amazed how much alignment there's been during this process. And maybe it's just a function of it's gotten so bad down there that it's a pretty good case study on, where not to go. So since 1980, it's nobody feels proud of the way it looks down at the harbor now, but then the themes that came out through Gabe's process, there was tremendous alignment about what folks did want to see. And that's not always the case. Sometimes we have, people don't even know if they want a public space or a park or trees. But in this case, that wasn't true. We heard a lot of the same themes over and over and over again. And that's actually fairly unique in a public process.
Yeah, I'd like Claire to elaborate a little bit on that, because I think one of the big misconceptions is that we had like these secret hidden plans that we were holding in reserve for some period of time. And the reality is we actually waited until the Just Economy team produced our first community engagement report before we held our kickoff meeting with the design team. And so I think for designers, it was a little bit different of a process as well. And I'd love for you to talk about how reading that report, coming to the community meetings, informed how you started coming up with this kind of amalgamous thing that was in your head, and then eventually, we put it down on paper. But I think it'd be great to provide.
Yeah, no, it was great, because there were these themes of alignment were already on the page, and a lot of them don't sound that complicated when they just kind of are put out in a report. We want shade, we want healthy spaces, we want habitat. Like these are all warm hugs things, right? But here we are like getting it implemented and it becomes harder. So we were really, really heartened to see a lot of these kind of ecological themes over and over in the reporting, because that's a place that we would want to begin anyway. And then the other thing that we did, once we heard these themes around mobility, inclusivity, a kind of democratic ground plane, a place where everybody is welcome, which was not the case in the 80s. And since that's been frequently not the case. So these were themes that we saw over and over. And then when we did start sketching, it was really great because we didn't start with any program from these guys. They allowed us to have a blank piece of paper, the feedback from the community, and ask, what does this want to feel like? So we started with really kind of a waterfront identity. And I've heard from a couple people, that's the first time that's really been done that way in Baltimore. And a lot of the public are well-traveled. They've been everywhere. They're like, why can't we be like Copenhagen? Why can't we be like Sydney or Vancouver or Hong Kong? And so people were bringing these ideas that were very radical for Harborplace. It's not just a facelift. It's like, let's rethink altogether.
Help me understand, when you say a waterfront identity, what does that look like? What does that mean? Like, help me understand what that actually means.
Sure. It comes back to the word experience, I think. So what does it feel like to be there on the waterfront? And is it a very urbane place with large canopy trees and, kind of chic cafes and lots of tables and chairs and places to spill out? Is it more plaza character? Is it something softer, greener, more habitat focused? Is it a place with all these little inlets and places to get into the water? So that's sort of, so we sort of had these sort of early ideas.
Right.
If we were to kind of rethink.
Or some iconic structure or something like that.
Well, and I'm the landscape architect, so I don't do structures.
You're in a different
We'll get to that, I'm sure.
I got it.
Yeah, it's like if we were to just, think fresh, take the 1980 design out altogether, thinking about the history of Baltimore, the craftsmanship that's endemic to Baltimore, some of these incredible themes that Gabe pulled out of the public process, what would we do if we just started from scratch?
Right.
And it was great because Dave and Adam, they didn't say, how much is that going to cost? And here's your program.
Right.
They said, start drawing. And so that it was sort of the genesis from Gabe's work that allowed us to do that.
Got it. Excellent.
There are some really cool drawings if you go to our website, ourharborplace.com/theplan. And our presentation that Dave and the team, Claire and Vaki and Adam as well, gave to UDAP last week, I believe,
Thursday,
that had some of the earliest drawings on what that, and I thought those were so neat. They were really cool.
Right.
Yeah, and I think just kind of expanding on that, how community and design process ties together and culminates with what folks have now seen in terms of renderings and the full presentation. We really started with these three ideas. Big shade, because we heard time and time again, there's no place to get out of the sun. I'm a guy who in the summer, I can't be in the sun.
Yeah.
There's no place to sit. Then this idea of the water. So thinking about our maritime history, the water used to come up all the way to Light and Pratt Street, and we've encroached on it a great amount. So we wanted to stay within the bounds of the existing coverage. And then, the last notion of this marsh garden city is basically, what if we restore it to what it was hundreds of years ago, and then buildings kind of grow out of that space? And I think what we've done is kind of successfully incorporated the best elements of each one of those into the ground plane that you experience and that you see in our plan. And so it was really a lot of fun to think through that, especially, for those of us that grew up here and spent our time as kids at Harborplace, to now all of a sudden be in this role to say, hey, we have a chance to reinvent this for the next century. So the next group of kids who got to experience it now have this amazing world-class facility.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, obviously.
Yeah. So if you want, I think we could take folks through the presentation briefly, talk a little bit about the community engagement process itself, and then some of the design.
All right. You just tell me where to start.
Yeah, so this is perfect. I think the images here on the right really do a great job of giving a snapshot of all of the different things that we did. So we started with an open call to every neighborhood association and community development corporation in the city in May of last year. That was over a month before we closed on the property. And I think it's important to note that we actually debated internally. Do we start community engagement or do we close first? And we decided, it's really important for us to get these thoughts from the city no matter what. Let's get started now. And so We then had a big meeting at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum at the beginning of June. We had a meeting in August at the Waxter Senior Center. We worked with 4 youth workers from the Mayor's Youth Works program who helped us create a youth engagement strategy. We canvassed, we knocked over 1,000 doors. And then we even had signs on the sides of buses. I saw one on Fayette Street last weekend. It was actually the first one I had seen, but I've gotten texts from people all the time that say, oh yeah, I saw one of the signs on the sides of the buses. And this is evidence and proof positive that what we really wanted was to get as much input as we possibly could and to let the city of Baltimore know we want to hear from you because we want to reflect your voice in these designs. So if you go to the next slide. So, I think Claire talked a lot about these pillars or these themes that kind of consistently came up. So economic sustainability means the math has to work. That means that we can't be here 10, 20 years from now because we have a failed project that wasn't sustainable. Connectivity with the water is the anchor. It's the timeless element of what we have here that for generations will continue to attract people. So let's open up those sight lines to the water. Let's create more ways to interact with the water. And you'll see how we did that. Accessibility, this has manifested itself in a number of different ways. So this is people feeling unsafe crossing Light and Pratt Street. This is being able to move through an entire downtown neighborhood as opposed to moving pocket to pocket. But this is also about having access to the waterfront more fully than it exists today. Locality, my dad had a small business at Harborplace when I was a kid. It was a sports memorabilia store on the second floor of the Light Street Pavilion. And that local flavor of local businesses, things you couldn't get anywhere else, that's something that we've kind of lost over the past couple decades. But we really, in our plan, want to find a way to bring back those local vendors. We've done that through our local tenancy plan. But that's kind of grooming these permanent tenants for hopefully a reinvigorated Harborplace.
Right.
And then resiliency. This is probably one of the biggest things on the forefront of folks' minds.
Yep.
January 9th, we flooded almost as high as Isabel a number of years ago. So we need to deal with this promenade. We need to deal with our failing infrastructure, no matter whether we build our buildings or not. That investment needs to be made for the future of Baltimore's waterfront. Safety and security, we think that comes with activity. The more people are on the ground, the more people are doing things, the safer the place will become. There's not a vacuum that kind of absorbs kind of the more nefarious elements.
Right.
And then building equitably. This isn't just about inclusionary and affordable housing, which we will have in our residential component, but this is about making sure that the ground plane, the public realm, and the buildings themselves, the architecture and design welcomes everybody to the space. So go to the next slide. And we'll just kind of take folks through our general idea for a planning approach. And the big concept here is the pavilions today block the water, as do the roads. And so let's eliminate those barriers to the water. We've recommended certain changes to Light and Pratt Street as well as Conway. We'll need to work through those with the city and the state.
Let me jump in to say just real quick, when you say the existing buildings, block the view of the water, I think it's important to include ground level view.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Because a lot of people get that misconstrued and they're wondering, how what do you mean? It's the ground level view, which David mentioned in our interview, which is what 99.9% of people, their interaction with those buildings are going to be walking on the ground.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And I want to introduce a term, Vaki Moema, the Gensler team, one of our design partners, introduced this term democratic ground plane. And I think that's a really nice way to think about it. These are the buildings, the pavilions that are there now, lovely as the experience was in the 80s, they're kind of hogs in terms of the ground plane. Like it's hard to get around them. You can't, if you're 3 blocks back, you can't see the water. And so density is actually our friend here. Anyone who goes to New York or, some of the newer parts of DC or Miami, you get great activation without hogging the ground plane. And I think that's really important. We want to unlock that.
Right. And that's, how do you accomplish that?
So we can build up
verticality
instead of building out, which is
Right.
what the pavilions do now. I mean, they're only 2 stories, but they take a huge amount of space.
Right.
And then it's about view sheds and experience and thinking about, how far do people really want to walk? We're human beings, right? Like to ask us to kind of go 2 parcels out of our way to come 2 parcels back. It's like, it's inconvenient. I don't want to do it.
Especially difficult walks.
Yeah.
Right. So I stood outside of 414 Lake Street And it's like, you're kind of like almost like you're going to jump in a cold tub of water. You don't want to jump into the road because it's a distance.
In the greatest cities, there's a sense of ease. You're walking block to block under the trees.
Yeah.
There's a place to sit, place to grab a coffee. You got your kids or your grandma.
Right.
That's what we want to deliver.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that I'm listening to everything. I read everything. If there's a comment in my Facebook group, I've read it, right? Or someone I know has read it and told me about it. And you hear people saying the same thing. I've read a comment earlier just before the show where Andrew Pizzicane mentioned that that he felt like the festival marketplace was still a good avenue, but you got to have density, right? And I agree with him that you got to have density. But I got to couple Andrew's comment with what David Tafaro said yesterday, which is festival marketplaces aren't profitable, but a lot of real estate developers invest in them because they've got residential components, and they're taking it as a loss leader to provide an amenity to the residential area that they own in that vicinity. So when you take the totality of those and start putting them together, then you start understanding that density is the key, right? But you still have to build that. That's still a commercial space now, so it has to be built with commerce in mind. So sorry to interrupt.
No,
I think one of the things that really helped us yield our public space design was Claire did this great analysis of waterfronts around the world and how much space there is from the face of the water to the face of the building on the opposite side of the street. It's in our UDAP presentation, which is on our website. Baltimore is bigger by hundreds of feet than many of these.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we've got like 350, 400 feet from the opposite. So the Light Street and Pratt Street building edge to the water, 300 to 400 feet. That's including 5 to 8 lanes of traffic, medians, the saddest trees you've ever seen in your life, loading docks. And then you look at Chicago Riverwalk, which is amazing.
Yeah.
They're doing all that in about 40 feet.
Wow.
So it's not a lack of space. It's about being really smart with how they implement design and how they implement the public space and the development within that space.
Right.
So we have an abundance of space downtown.
Right. It's not being used efficiently at all.
Yeah.
It's not intelligent.
That's right.
And I remember walking over I walked across Pratt Street on Thanksgiving Day. We ate at the Capitol Grill, and my wife wanted to go over to the Christmas Village. So after surviving crossing Pratt Street, we get there, and I'm not going into Christmas. I'm standing outside. Number one, it was pretty warm that day. So even then, the sun was beating on me. It was November. And then I couldn't find a place to sit down.
Yeah.
So my experience was not what I wanted it to be. And the entire dinner that we had, I was dreading the fact that I had to go into the harbor afterwards because she was forcing me to do so. And I don't want that experience. I want a different experience with the harbor. Right?
Yeah, I do think it's worth mentioning. There's a reason that construct exists, right? Somebody came up with this plan. The first highways through Baltimore were built in the late 50s.
Right.
And then, we created a master plan in the early 70s, and then the Harborplace plan came out in 78, and, ultimately was implemented. And, it was a different time then. People came into downtown in a car and left downtown in a car at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
We've kind of repositioned how cities are operating. And so cities reinvent themselves. They have these cycles. And what was created worked. It was, I've heard somebody who used to work at the Rouse Company a number of years ago, who since went on to do a lot of real estate projects across the globe, who said, Harborplace was really the proverbial pebble in the pond, right? It had all these ripple effects that who knows if Camden Yards would exist if we didn't have Harborplace, right?
Sure.
But the pond has kind of gone still now,
right?
And we need to drop that next pebble and sort of reverberate that activity from a major investment like this. And so just like then, they made certain changes today.
Yeah.
We think that this plan provides a growth module for Baltimore.
And you can argue that the pebbles are actually being thrown all around the harbor, and the ripples are coming in, right? So when you look at what they've done with Topgolf and the Horseshoe over here, and then Harbor East over there, and then the Camden Yards are still over here,
and we're the hole in the donut.
And CFG, right? CFG Arena just got redone. It's like, all right, all these other things around you, right? So, yeah.
So why don't we take you through some of the designs here?
Yep.
I think the next two slides are important just because we kind of show how, to Claire's point, the pavilions today take up a lot of space on the ground. They're big buildings. And so what you see superimposed underneath are our proposed footprints, which if you slide to the next slide, you can see we're decreasing.
That's what I didn't get before. Okay. So those other underneath the little, I can't point to them. I got it. Those are the new footprints.
That's right.
Okay, got it.
And so
that's what I missed.
The idea here is, as Claire said, these buildings are kind of hogs to the ground plane. We're decreasing the amount of space on the ground that's enclosed by buildings.
Right.
And we're not only are we giving that space back to the public, but we're taking roadway space, trying to create public space that people can walk on, and then bringing that park back in. So we're adding an enormous amount of public space.
Well, it's all public space at the ground level. So in totality, it's the same a little bit, except you're bringing them McKeldin, but you're giving them public outdoor space.
That's right.
Yes.
Right.
That's
right. Yeah.
That's exactly
Additional
right.
public outdoor space.
And then if you go to the next slide, you can see what we're also doing. And we have some great side-by-sides up on the website that show this. We're extending the city's street grid to the water. So if you're standing a block or two off of the waterfront, now you can see through to the water instead of seeing the Pizzeria Uno sign.
Right. Yeah.
So if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see the image from Pratt and Light. This demonstrates, kind of bringing McKeldin Plaza back to the waterfront, creating this big public park, and then, how we view the right-of-way, which includes the red line. We think transit is really important, and multimodal connectivity is really important. Prioritizing pedestrians is a huge element of our plan. And interestingly enough, I was very lucky to be invited to the Department of Planning's comprehensive plan meeting for downtown Baltimore. There were many designers and Baltimoreans and developers and representatives from the city who came to that design charrette. And I think the biggest takeaway that every group came away with was let's prioritize pedestrians and deprioritize the vehicle. And that's what this plan seeks to do, both in the public realm as well as the right-of-way. So if we go to the next slide, we'll just take a quick walk around the Inner Harbor just so folks can kind of see it. So this is standing in front of West Shore Park. Again, lots of shade, lots of places to sit that don't exist today. But the idea is West Shore Park's this amazing space that can be programmed. And so we think that West Shore Park and Rash Field are an amazing component of an interconnected park network. So it's not just this space, it's the entire area all the way around the harbor. And, I think Claire can talk about this a little bit. We thought about how do we diversify the options in this space? We don't want a bunch of the same thing all the way around. How do we provide a bunch of different uses?
Yeah, and so this upper promenade, this is the sort of shady, urbane, kind of larger capacity piece of the promenades in the public realm. Lots of places to sit. It's barrier-free and universally accessible, which that might not be a term everybody's familiar with, but when you think about how the pavilions work right now, it's a lot of stairs, it's a lot of stem walls, it's a lot of physical blockades to get into where you want to go. So we open it up, make everything level. My grandma on her walker, my sister with her double stroller, everybody's together. That's really important. And then the seating, that is like the unsung hero of public space.
Oh, yeah.
A place to sit in the shade and look at the water. It's pretty simple, but it's critical.
Yeah, and I think
I don't know how they missed it before.
It was probably there and it was taken out, over the years. That's a pretty typical story in the US. It's like a couple bad things happen, we take the benches away, and then pretty soon it's terrible for everybody.
And so this is one of the ways, this next image, that we've thought about designing for resiliency. We worked with the city, we worked with their resiliency experts, we worked with the Waterfront Partnership, and then our engineering team, our environmental engineering team. We looked at what is sea level rise going to do to us, and how can we essentially pre-wire ourselves for the future and eliminate the flooding that we see more frequently, but still provide that access to the water. And I think that was something we heard time and again in community engagement was we love that we can get up directly to the water and interact with it. The paddle boats, the Baltimore Blue Way. The water is the anchor, so getting people down specifically to that level was important while we were raising the upper promenade by about 3 feet to deal with resiliency measures. So this section is a floating section, which is further south in front of West Shore Park. And then if you go to the next slide, we have a series of fixed sections as we move around. So this today would be looking at the Light Street Pavilion. We have a fixed lower section and a fixed upper section. Again, the upper section is designed to be dry 99.9% of the time. The lower section in an event like we had a couple weeks ago could get wet, but it's designed to be dry in most instances. And we've seen that in different designs around the world in having this two-leveled resilient design that enables different spaces to be utilized in different ways. And then if you continue to the next, we have that where the amphitheater used to be kind of in the center, but we pay homage to that amphitheater with the seating in between the two. And then the next image shows us looking back west from under the World Trade Center. And we go back to that two-tiered condition where we have the lower floating, we have the upper fixed, the seating, the shade. But over here, we've proposed some floating wetlands for habitat, as well as cleaning of the water. And then the next image is what we hope is both aspirational and attainable, which is floating islands. And that was one of the most liked images at our September 30th community engagement meeting at Harborplace, were these floating islands in Copenhagen. And so imagine, somebody said this to us recently. Imagine, and it might have been you, Desmond, actually, I think, said, what if kids could come down here on a field trip and instead of grabbing lunch and going back, they could go for a swim. That's not something we were able to do as kids in this water. But, maybe the next generation can, and we should strive for that. And I think thanks to the efforts of the city, the mayor's office, the Waterfront Partnership, Healthy Harbor, we're close. That's within reach for us.
Can I just add to, it's sort of like, this is always like, we sometimes position this as like, this is the fun slide, and we'll have swimming and boating and stuff. But I think it's a lot deeper than that. Some of the civil rights issues in Baltimore were about access to swim skills and pools because it is hot as hell in the summer and we need to cool ourselves off. That's going to be an increasingly existential kind of situation here in Baltimore. So it's about access, it's about recreation, it's about activation, it's about learning the way to use the water that it would have always been, previous to probably 75 years ago. So I think it's a really kind of deep moment in the plan. Lots of options and fun. There's nothing wrong with fun, but it's also connecting to something bigger.
Yeah, if people are freely swimming in the harbor, we've come a long way.
I'll get in.
Yeah. I know folks jumped in last fall, and I know there's a plan to do it again this year.
Yeah.
So in the next slide and the next few slides, we can go through them quickly, just running through the buildings. This next slide or series of slides talks about what folks have come to call the sail building. The first thing we started doing here is we put together a design brief and we did an international design competition. We said, here are the dimensions of the parcels. We'll make our team available as much as possible, but we want to see your best conception. But specifically, we want to see how do you interpret the idea that public space doesn't end on the ground. And so this building, if you go to the next image, is meant to invite all of Baltimore up the face of the building to experience different retail, food and beverage, restaurant opportunities. We think this is probably a ground level market type space. So incorporating some of the elements of Harborplace, some of the local markets like Cross and Lexington and Broadway, and showcasing a lot of our great local vendors with maybe a curated food hall on the second level and some type of event venue and activator. But the big move for this building was to say, this building really has four faces, but two primary, right? We're facing the city, we're facing the water, and we're inviting people up onto this elevated park to a place where they can see the water from a way they've never been able to see it before, which we thought was really important.
Absolutely. And what's the height there? What's the I guess the tallest point that you would actually be able to look out onto the harbor and get a vantage point on?
So the top corner there on the backside of the image is about 175 feet tall.
Okay, that's tall.
So if you're up on that top floor, whether that ends up being a marquee restaurant or that ends up being a bar or a public space, we want you to do some
type of an observation deck.
Right. We want you to be able to come up there and see the water from a different perspective than you can today. We thought that was really important. And then the next couple images, I think, showcase how we wanted to address how the buildings turn their back to the city. So, today we have a loading dock, we have a grease trap for Cheesecake Factory, and we actually have a sidewalk that stops. There's not a continuous way to walk through that space. In our plan, we want to decrease the amount of vehicular lanes. We want to add transit. We want to have a continuous protected multimodal pathway, a much larger, more gracious sidewalk. And then we want to invite people into this building. So that arch that you see there and then the next image is really meant to invite people into the building and say, we want you to come in here. We want you to see these small tenants. We want you to come grab a great coffee from Matriarch or a crab pie from Crust by Mac, or we want you to get your all-day breakfast from Saturday Morning Cafe. We want to showcase the best of what Baltimore has to offer, and we think this building can do that. And we think 3XN, who was the ultimate winner of that design competition, really did a great job, both in their design. But I think it's important for us to stop and say, not only 3XN, who was voted the world's most innovative architect in 2022, but some of the other biggest names in worldwide design all came to Baltimore to pitch on this site. And I think that should tell Baltimore that we deserve world class. We deserve the most amazing designs that can exist, because these are people who literally work for sovereign wealth funds and design for governments.
Right.
And they wanted to come to Baltimore and help us re-envision what our waterfront can be within the construct of what community engagement had told us. And I think it's really important. It shouldn't be lost on us.
It's a unique building. I mean, you're not going to see another one, right? Number one, and that's you want something to, like you said, an identity. Well, this is you meant more from a landscape perspective. I'm more of a structured guy, but I want to see something that that if I'm flying over in a plane and I see it, oh, that's Baltimore. It's unmistakably Baltimore, right? And I think that building will accomplish that. I'm interested in how you said it's come to be known, the Sale Building. I didn't know that wasn't the name that you gave it. Is that not the case?
We called it 201 East Pratt Street.
There's other poets in the project.
The design team called it that colloquially as well. I think it just lends itself to that. That was some of the design inspiration for it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we like to go by building addresses.
Right.
Adam, can you talk a little bit about these international firms? They got some, this is what we're interested in. They got some parameters. What was included in that packet? And I ask because I know the answer to this. And I want you to say it.
So the answer to the question is, we said, here's the parcel. It's bound by Pratt Street to the north, the water to the south. And then you kind of saw how we arrived at our planning methodology of extending the street grid to the water. So what that created was a four-sided parcel. And we said, here's the parcel. It's adjacent to this amazing park that we want to be the center of activity for Baltimore. We're looking for a building in the 5 to 8 story range. We don't want it to be too big given the surrounding space behind it. We want it to be incorporated into the fabric of the city. We want it to be authentic to Baltimore's materials and Baltimore's story. We want to create an elevated place where Baltimoreans can freely come up and use the space as they please. And then a place that can showcase great local vendors and everything that Baltimore has to offer, both to us residents as well as all of our visitors. And that quite literally was the design brief. And so what we did is we met many times with all of the design teams. We gave them not only the first 30-day community report, we gave them our 60-day report, which came out right after the September 30th meeting. And so I think it's really important to note that they read these documents. People from outside of Baltimore not only came here, walked the space toward it, but they digested what everybody in Baltimore had to say. And I think, that is what yielded the design that you see here today. Moving on to the next building, 203 East Pratt Street. It's a very traditional commercial building. It sits next to the Sale. I think it's a really great companion from a design perspective, but ultimately, this building serves to provide a world-class commercial facility on the water.
I feel bad for 203 East Pratt. It's like you get done talking about the Sale building. It's the fourth time I've heard this, and every time everyone gets done talking about the Sale building, it's like 203 East Pratt gets no love.
I love this building, though.
Yeah, I'm starting to because nobody else is.
It's the quiet one.
Yeah,
I come from a big family. The quiet one is doing work, doing really important. Unifying work.
There's probably a sheriff's office in there or something doing something really really good.
Well, that building, I mean, this building, and you'll see it in the next image, has some really great elements to it. And yes, I think it doesn't get a lot of love, as you say. And it's funny, the designer for Gensler, who specifically worked on this, he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder too. But what we wanted to design here was a companion to the sale, something that honors that building, but isn't identical to it, because that would feel kind of contrived. So if you look at waterfront developments across the world,
you can't compete with it. It's like the bridesmaid's dress, right?
Well, and 3XM might get mad at me for saying this, but they did design a companion building for next door for that parcel, and it's a continuation of the sale. It's a beautiful, beautiful structure. But what we thought is, when you look at waterfronts around the world, they have differentiated buildings. If you see the same thing kind of repeated over and over again, it feels fake. It doesn't feel like it was always there. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that was a big piece to this building, is how do we incorporate the materials? How do we incorporate all the different lines from downtown, create something amazing? And so, to me, the coolest thing about this building, in addition to having some of the best views in Baltimore, is it has this massive covered public space underneath where you could spill out from a cafe, where you could enjoy your meal when you either walking out of the sale or from the retail on the ground, look out over the wetlands. And then, you think about what's there today, that's the Cheesecake Factory. And then you look out over the dragon boats. And so what if you had a shady place to sit with your family before or after you went out on the kayaks? And I think it's a really cool design move to have a much bigger section of public space there than exists today. The next building and really the park here is extremely important to our plan. So we call this the Park at Freedom's Port, and that is an honorific to the historical communities that existed here along Light and Pratt and in Baltimore more generally. I think, as probably your viewers heard from Dave and his talk last week, something that we really spent a lot of time studying, especially with Professor Dale Green, who works at Sultan Campbell Britt, was also a professor at Morgan State, really talked and unearthed a lot of the history here of how this was the largest concentration of freed slaves in the United States in antebellum America. And that's a story that, I was a history major in college. Everybody learns about the War of 1812, and they learn about our significance with Francis Scott Key, but you don't learn about this in Baltimore. I think it's really important that we have a space that enables us to interact with that. Admittedly, we don't have 100% of this figured out on how we plan to have memorials or monuments or what have you.
Sure.
But we're working with some of the foremost leaders in the world who do these types of things. And I think this is a role that Baltimore has to play in the future, is to say, how do we want to create this environment?
Yeah, I don't think that park will ever be finished. Right. I mean, it'll be.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, we're trying to create an atmosphere, like a place where you can have dialogue, you can have conversation, you can have serenity. I mean, you can program it as well. It's got to do a lot of things.
I mean, there's a lot of stories out there. East Housen. I mean, there's plenty of stories, and we're going to be learning about more of them. Yeah. Right. So I don't think that park will ever be done, but we just got to get it started.
Yeah.
That's right. And so, one of the things I think that this area of the harbor does really well, if you remember, back in the 80s and 90s, and even the early 2000s, there were street performances, there were magicians. You would just stop by and there was something going on, right? Yeah. There was always activity there. And so if you go to the next image, we've kind of tried to recreate that energy. We've got a large hardscape performance space that backs off to some of the water features that Claire and her team designed. But we now have capacity for up to 2,000 people in this amphitheater instead of kind of the more concrete style blocks that we have today. This means we can do proper performances. And then the other thing is, as we saw in the sale, that graduates up on the other side. So we now have a bowl, essentially, where a performance can occur and you can experience it from a 360-degree perspective. I think that's something a little bit different than we have today. But again, what we heard time and time again, no matter what element of community engagement it was, we want this to be an active place. We want to take in free shows. We want to have a place to sit and enjoy. And so we think the Park at Freedom's Port, this amphitheater, can do that. But then we also thought it was really important to have some type of food vendor or outdoor bar space. So on the top of that amphitheater there, and in the next image, you can see, again, trying to create that differentiated perspective where today you can't see the water from this level. But we want you to be able to look out over the constellation and look out down the harbor from this perspective. And then just what I thought was a really cool design move. So BCT Design Group and Sultan Campbell Britt kind of collaborated with Claire and her team on the amphitheater and on this. But underneath, so in the next slide, we have about 8,500 square feet of what we call experiential retail. So that's sitting under that amphitheater and under that outdoor space on the left side there.
Okay. All right. I didn't realize that.
So BCT said, hey, Baltimore's all about its crabs. But what about oysters? They're kind of the 203's Pratt of seafood in Baltimore.
Right.
And so they came up with this idea of a wild set of oysters and how oysters kind of stack organically onto themselves and build up these hills. And so the inspiration for that was, really looking at Times Square in New York. Times Square is active all the time, right?
Yeah.
But one of the craziest things that we talked about in numerous design meetings is they put in a set of red risers, plain old bleacher seats that you could get anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot find a seat on those things.
Never.
And so doing something really simple, like just creating a little bit of space where people can sit and be at a slightly higher perspective and watch everything go by.
Right.
Is a place where people want to be.
I mean, people eat that up. I worked on 50th, on 7th Avenue between 49th and 50th, and right, going like 8 streets up from the center of Times Square. And you're right, it's an active place. It's not a New Year's Eve. It was active every day, and but people do like to get different perspectives on things that they look at. I mean. I'd like going to my neighbor's house and sitting on their deck because I get to look at my house from a perspective I don't see it at very often, right? And it's interesting. So people always like to. We did a friend of mine down the block. Had a boat. EJ Cocker, I'm shouting you out. He had a boat and he would take us out onto the harbor, to be able to see the harbor, from being on water. It's just a different perspective. And to the extent that you can create, a lot more of those, because right now we just have a bunch of red bricks and, you're getting beat up by the sun.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, I think anyone that doesn't look at this and appreciate the amount of thought, effort that went into it is either just being disingenuous or they're just absolutely nuts.
Well, we appreciate it.
But now everybody, I think everyone has a legitimate, thought. Well, are we really going to get it? Is it too good to be true? That's probably the more appropriate question. Is it too good to be true? Can we get this?
So not only do we think we can get this, we think we deserve a world-class
Oh, yeah.
facility like this.
I hear you.
And look, that's our first pillar is economic sustainability. And as David said,
Right.
the math has to work.
Yeah.
We think that creating a retail environment like this, just think about the fact that today what you would be looking at is basically the northern side of Hooters. But in the future, you'll be able to see over to the power plant. You'll have this double-lined retail corridor.
Mm-hmm.
We think retail can be successful in an environment like this where it's failed previously, because what we're doing is we're saying we're going to prioritize the pedestrian and we're going to put more feet on the ground to service all of the great vendors that we're going to have.
Yeah.
And I think creating that environment is something that can be sustainable over time.
Right.
I think the other really cool piece to this specific element here is we don't view that left side there as traditional retail. We think that's potentially artisans and sculptors, and that's why we think of it more as activating. So if you look at some of the great retail environments in the world, it's not just lines of the same shop on either side.
Mm-hmm.
You have a draw that could from a creative community that draws people down, and then you have the more traditional retail. So that's what we show in the mixed use building immediately to the south there, to the right on this image, multiple levels of it. So basically 303 Light Street on the next slide is 2 levels of publicly available commercial space, very similar to the Harborplace Light Street Pavilion.
Which slide?
Yeah, you can go to the next one. That's fine.
This one here?
Yeah, perfect. So we've got 2 levels of public commercial space, and then above it we do have residential. But we talked about that, right? It's the same idea as the Festival Marketplace being an activator. This is ground level retail mixed use with residents above. That building on the left, 414 Light, is almost fully occupied at this point. And people love being there and without even having a comfortable way to cross the street, as you said. So imagine if there's a way to have more porosity across downtown, across
Well,
or accessibility, right?
What's going to happen? I stood out there. I have my cameras out there. In 2.5 minutes, I saw a family get separated. Right, they thought they could go. Two or three of them turned back. 2 of them kept going. Luckily, the car saw that going down and slowed through the intersection. But the 2 kids got to the middle of the median. Thank God. And the other half of the family was here. I barely had a chance to turn around. There's a fire truck, barreling down, and it was just it's tough. So I had to think about it. You guys are here in my studio, so you know where I am. Pimlico Racetrack is right across the street here, right across Northern Parkway. And when I get up to take my son to school every once in a while, I'll see those horses galloping and warming up in the morning. And it's just a majestic sight to see. And I'm thinking, man, if I didn't have to cross Northern Parkway,
Right.
I would be over there with my coffee on a regular basis, right? It's literally less than 1,000 feet away. But I'm not going to get up at 7 a.m. and think that I'm, with it enough and lucid enough to get across Northern Parkway, safely. And that's what I felt like when I was standing at 414 Light Street, looking across and saying, man, if there was a great coffee vendor over there, if I lived in 414 Light, would I go there 4 out of 5 days a week or 1 out of 5? Right. And that's the difference. Right. So when we make it more accessible, you make it, like you say, people are easy. We're the on-demand generation, coming up now. They want things to be easy. They don't want a lot of stress. You don't need, and I think Claus talked about it quite a bit. Is that the design that's there now was made to have, you got the harbor and then you got the park and then everything's kind of stepped back on the other side of the highways, which I think, all right, well, I can see it from a postcard perspective, but from a use and functionality perspective, it's okay.
I'm just saying, finish your thought because I just
from a use and I felt the difference going from what it was like going from the Capitol Grill on foot, over there. I mean, generally when I go to the harbor, I go once a year, really, because my wife usually on Christmas she makes us go and get the kids with Santa, and I have to take it, to my mom's on Christmas Eve, and I usually just pull up on Light Street and park. I don't even go in. I stay in the car, and they run in, get the picture, and get back in the car, and we take off because it's just not easy to get to.
Yeah. I was just like bingo to everything you said, because I think this is how urban design has changed. It used to be this sort of heroic exercise and like the massing and the big moves, and
Give me
that
functionality.
has nothing to do with what it's like to try and cross 8 lanes of traffic with a family of 5. So we have to think
Looks
differently
good in
now.
the picture.
Yeah, it looks good in a picture. It looks cool in a model that you can kind of put down in front of the mayor. But we're talking about on the ground. We're talking about people, how we walk, how we feel, the heat. And that it's a totally different way.
I can tell you how that family felt. How that mother was worried.
Blood pressure.
With her, it's like they hadn't
roof.
even gotten to the harbor and they're all stressed out.
Yeah.
They're halfway across Light Street. Well, at least half of the family is halfway across Light Street. The other half is still in front of 414 with me.
Yeah.
And too bad I didn't catch the sound. But I guess it's kind of good I didn't. I had the sound off on the recording. But they hadn't even made it to the harbor yet, and they were stressed out.
I mean, I think the good news, and we talked a lot about this, is, just like throw a dart at the map. Almost every other city in the country, probably the world, is reckoning with this same issue because we gave up way too much of our public realm to cars.
Right.
Everybody did.
Yeah.
And now, through great leadership and vision, all of our peers are taking it back.
Right.
And it's just like incontrovertible. It has to happen. Yeah. And there's tons of great examples. Yeah. And it's the key.
Got to have the public transportation to go with it. I lived in New York, man. I saw my car twice a week. There's a move from one side to the other for street cleaning, right? Or to go get it out of the tow line because I forgot to do it. But you know, I could walk a block and a half, and I was jumping down in the F train, right? And then I'm in the city that I can go anywhere.
Yeah.
But you got to have the public transit to go with it.
There's just so many good examples,
Yeah.
and it's like, you know, it's past due here. So it's
we didn't come here to talk about transportation. What do you got?
Well, no, I was actually going to
Sorry.
say the next slide is a great way to talk about transportation.
Oh,
So
okay.
You know, it shows our conception of Light Street, which is 2 lanes in either direction,
Gotcha.
with a multi-directional protected lane. But again, it's a small thing, and when you say it, you're like, well, yeah, duh, but it doesn't exist. There is not a protected mobility lane from Camden Station to the harbor. So we're a city that wants to get people out, or as cities reinvent themselves, they want to get people out of cars, right?
Right.
We still operate under the come in on 95, come down Conway and park,
Right.
leave Conway, go or cut through to 83 and vice versa.
Mhm.
In this, you could get to DC and back on your commute without ever having to get in a car. You could ride a scooter, you could ride a bike, you could get right up to the
You
station.
can walk.
You could
From
walk.
that building. You
It's
walk
2
over to the
blocks.
Camden line. The Camden
That's
line
exactly
goes right in
right.
front of Camden Yards, and you're on the Camden line all the way to Union Station,
Yeah.
That's right.
DC. Yeah.
And I think it's also important to note that it's not just about connecting to Harborplace. It's that larger accessibility conversation.
Of course.
where you can get from the train station down to the harbor. Well, now you can get from the harbor to Harbor East.
Yep.
Or you can get up Sharp Street to Lexington.
I
or
can tell you
CFG.
all the stops on the MARC train, like because you're going to bring those folks up now, right? You know, whether in Laurel or New Carrollton or wherever, right? You got people that can, and it's if you realize that it's an easy walk from, you know, Conway. I don't know, maybe the island can go away, and that would be a protected walk or something. But I think there has to be something that connects. I mean, it's a later conversation. Maybe this is part 8 of our talk. But I have some ideas. So I'm just going to
ourharborplace.com/get involved.
I think I might blow it up.
But you know, we'll skip forward 2 slides. But you know, this kind of gets to, if you go one more, this gets to 2 weeks ago what we used to call the AFC Championship shot. Still too soon for that. But you know, when Dave first embarked on this, and when I first started working with him, he said, you know, I want to create the next image that's on the postcard that everybody knows is Baltimore.
Right.
And we think the sail is a super unique and iconic element, but we think the design here really fits into the existing fabric of the city in terms of its skyline, in terms of enhancing views, and then creating a new world-class waterfront for Baltimore that's very similar to how waterfronts across the globe are reinventing themselves, especially post-industrial cities. And so, you know, 303 Light Street's the mixed-use element, the park at kind of the center of downtown, so the Park at Freedomsport, the corner of Light and Pratt, 201 East Pratt Street, the Sale Building, and 203 East Pratt. And the idea here is, again, let's graduate in height down to the center of activity. It's the Park of Freedomsport. It's the center of downtown. We want that to be the center of activity. And, you know, thanks to the governor resurrecting the Red Line, ideally that's a transit stop.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you can get there easily east-west. You can get there easily north-south.
Right.
So that gets to that accessibility component as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, and like you said, you're building for the next 50 to 100 years, you know, and as we talked about the park, it's never going to be done. Right. And, you know, there's going to be iterations of everything down there. You got to have, I mean, it's got to stay clean. It's got to stay safe. It's got to stay, you know, up to date. The build, everything's going to require, you know, it's going to require, you know, money be invested in it. Right. So there needs to be an economic driver, you know, to support that, you know, going into the future. It's not a one time you're just going to build this and then it's just going to be that way for the next 50 or 100 years. Right. And
that's right. And it's, you know, I think it's important to note that not only do we think this is, you know, a great architectural plan, we think this is the right plan for growth.
Right.
You know, this can generate ongoing tax revenues, not just property tax revenues, business tax revenues, personal property tax. Folks who live here now all of a sudden are moving to Baltimore and paying income tax in the
a
city.
lot of revenues. Right. Yeah.
There's a stat I always use for great public space and why invest in great public space. Well, it's not even a stat, but first an example. Central Park was built before all of that development around it, right? So that was visionary at the time. They're like, we're going to create an amazing public amenity. And then lo and behold, the highest priced real estate in the world now sits all around it,
Mhm,
right? So
mhm.
that was a good return on investment.
Sure.
And the stat that we typically hear is about 10 to 1 high quality public space to kind of raising the tax base and the investment around it.
Mhm.
My favorite project I love to rag on, the High Line in New York, is more like 700 to 1 by current calculations. So it's an ongoing evolution, but it absolutely is about like getting the bones in there and getting the high quality
I
public
missed
realm
the
in.
part about the Highline. What was that?
The last time I saw it quantified, the return on investment for every dollar they spent on the actual High Line,
Uh-huh.
they've earned $700 in tax revenue or return on investment in the parcels adjacent to the High Line. Now, that number is like always going up because
wow,
New York
wow.
is insane,
Right,
right?
right. Well, where they incorporated the residential is, I mean, there's parts of it you're even walking under.
That's right.
You know, right.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
and the buildings are, I mean, because they're beautiful and they're part of the experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So that paid off pretty well too.
yeah. Big fan of the High Line.
Yeah, and I mean,
I
you
think
look.
we need a shoreline.
Well, I mean, look, it's funny you say that. There are a number of folks in Baltimore, including the Waterfront Partnership, Planning Department, and other private groups that want to embark on a study for how we can make our contiguous 8-mile waterfront pathway
8.2 miles. You said.
8.2. Yes. Similar to an element like the High Line or the Beltline in Atlanta.
Right.
These are the
Yeah.
top rated things to do in those cities. And the fact that it's number, whatever it is, 244 on Yelp
Right.
is laughable. So let's really lean into that because ours is on the water.
Yeah. Yeah. Because people like to accomplish something. I did this, whatever you end up calling it, and if they walk the whole 8.2 miles, that's a milestone, right? For people that, that's a lot of sales in the retail areas, right? That if you come in and you start at one end, where does it start? I guess it starts down by Silo Point, or I don't know.
Yep. It starts over past the Museum of Industry, over on the south side by sea, and then it runs all the way past Harborplace, around through Fells, through Canton, and then down.
People like to accomplish stuff. They'll come just to walk that 8.2 miles and say, "I got the T-shirt." Right.
And the other thing that I think is really cool is that provides us an amazing opportunity to teach people about the history and the culture of Baltimore.
There you go.
Whether it's the Museum of Industry, the BMA,
Right.
Reginald F. Lewis, where you think about the Freedom Trail and a lot of the history that we're leaning into as a city. Now all of a sudden people can interact with it in a public space.
Right.
I think back, one of the memorable things when I was a kid was throwing the tea overboard in Boston. Well, we should have that element here in Baltimore, and people will remember that. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that time I went to Baltimore and I learned about that thing.
For the longest time, I had this desire to see, because you learn about it in grade school. I'm a little older than all you guys, but we kept hearing about this Plymouth Rock, right? And I was like, I'm never going to end up in Plymouth. Lo and behold, we go to, up to Massachusetts for summer, and I see on the ways, I'm like, hey, I could stop in Plymouth because our ferry ride wasn't until the morning. So we stop in Plymouth, we go see this thing. Have you ever been to Plymouth?
Nope.
You ever seen a rock? It's a pebble.
I think I remember it being underwhelming.
Yeah, it was extremely underwhelming. We're not going to do that, right? We're going to do something like real cool, and I can't wait to actually start to the work on building what's going to be the new harbor.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing that you're saying, which is as we go through this, all of these ideas can be incorporated into that public realm. There are great groups in Baltimore that do this work, but at the end of the day, we want all of Baltimore to see itself reflected, whether it's your interest in a specific historical element, whether it's a story that you want to tell about a relative or something in the past, or whether it's just saying, hey, I think that we should provide this honorific to this particular group.
Or getting out there and volunteering and laying bricks and
right.
actually have an area that you actually worked on, right? There's no better feeling than ownership, right? But
yeah, so I mean, I think the last slide here, which has the quote here on the top, is something we like to talk a lot about. So Mayor McKeldin, in his inaugural in 1963, actually his second mayoral term, laid out this vision for the harbor. And I think what we've talked about here tonight and what we continue to talk about, and especially about the Park at Freedom Sport, is it's not too dreamlike. This isn't too big for us. This isn't too nice for us. We are a world-class city, and we deserve this amazing element in the heart of our downtown. For too long, it started to fall into the water. And, I think, we're very fortunate that somebody like Dave Bramble and Peter Pinkert said, we're going to take a chance to do this. And it's really important that these are Baltimoreans that are looking to invest in Baltimore and be reflective of what Baltimore wants to see. And as Dave says, look, we have to lay our head here at the end of the night. We have to look at our family and our friends. So we feel a heavy responsibility to deliver on this for Baltimore.
No, I agree. I tell you, I don't think there was 41 minutes that I have enjoyed more in a long time than speaking with him, because it was completely laid back. And he was just himself, who I had never really talked to on that level, and you could see it was just authentic him. Mm-hmm. And this project, while I think probably before he embarked on it, probably didn't want it, but now that he's in it, right? I think there's this sense of responsibility and obligation to really deliver on it, and it comes across, right? It comes across when you talk to him, and I really hope that I'm not hoping. I know we're going to get there. I really hope that it's sooner than later, that we can actually start working on what's going to be, the next iteration of the harbor, and get past, some of the rhetoric misconceptions. But that's all part of the game, right? And but I think we're taking steps to really get past all that. I'm happy to hear anything else that you guys want to share, about the whether it's the engagement process or how you leverage that to, in some of your work on the art. So you're the landscape architect of it, which is that's the big fancy stuff. It's all the stuff on the ground. So as far as did you handle all of that internally, or were there other firms to talk to about how to make it the most environmentally resilient? And then you got the hardscape part of it, and then you had there's so many aspects of landscape,
right? It's a very broad field. Thank you for noting that. I guess I want to a couple of things. I think one thing, we talked about the kind of big concepts at the beginning, and then we kind of walked through the plan as it stands now in the buildings. It was like a constant push and pull, making sure that the public realm and the ambitions for the right of ways and for the circulation and the capacity were kind of robust enough.
Right.
Because I was thinking about this when Adam said, there's like dead end sidewalks right now. I mean, someone compromised on day one on public realm, if that's the case today.
Yeah.
So it was always this conversation around like the building and the public realm and making sure we have enough capacity, so then when the Orioles do win the World Series, we can parade through, right?
Yep.
So that was a really fun part of the collaboration between all the different members of the team. And then we don't do every single thing in-house. We do a lot, but then we had a couple specific experts looking at transportation and traffic engineering specifically. That's important because we're talking about traffic calming and road reductions, right? So that's going to have an impact. So that we had
a lot of conversation around the whole transportation thing. So that's going to be something.
So that's a whole, kind of genius mind on the team that's working on that. And then the other piece, the other two pieces really, we worked with Biohabitats, who are a Baltimore-based ecologist. They work nationally. Yeah. But they are, renowned experts on this kind of estuary ecosystem, and talked a lot about water quality and how do we bring habitat value into the project. And then last but not least, Moffett Nickel, who's a marine engineer. And they help model resiliency. So there's no answer. There's no solving for climate change. But they can kind of give us parameters and scenarios. And so they help the whole team think about, well, how high do we want to build the future promenade? Let's run, 15 million data points and kind of see all the different scenarios, and then talk about a level of risk.
What's the elevation on that?
For the promenade and the first floor on Light Street, we're looking at 9.5 feet.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, and then 10 feet on Light, where we have a little bit more room to go up. It's, you could go higher and be flood proof forever, but it's not really necessary.
We're only building for 100 years, is what Adam said.
And also we're building for mixed use, right? Like we're not building a intensive care unit.
Right.
This is retail. And so there's an acceptable level of risk that we determined with the team and in conversations with many different parties, while still achieving that open ground plane.
Sure.
Right. Because we don't want to, build up a pyramid that's nice and flood proof, but then everybody's looking up the stairs all day long.
Right.
So lots of experts were in the room to kind of inform how it all came together.
Amazing. Last question that I have is, do you have a number as far as when I'm thinking of square footage? Is there a number that you've returned from the existing pavilion footprints that is now outdoor publicly available space? What's the net difference of the footprint?
It's a great question. So our enclosed footprints are about 2,000 square feet smaller than the existing pavilions.
Mm-hmm.
So those two big spaces we're breaking up more or less into 5 different spaces that occupy less total space by about 2,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you add that space, the right-of-way of Calvert Street that becomes park, lanes of traffic that become public space, McKeldin Plaza being incorporated, and then public space on top of the sale building. We're adding over 4 acres of public space to specifically Inner Harbor Park. And I think it's important to say it that way because Inner Harbor Park is from the curb and in. And so by bringing McKeldin Plaza in, it now becomes a part of the connected park.
The curb on Light moves, the curb on Pratt moves a little probably.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and it's more usable. I mean, when you start talking about that 4-lane spur coming off of Light onto Pratt, I mean, that's, like you said, reserved for vehicles. I mean, I never see 4 lanes of traffic coming out of Federal Hill. I mean, 4 deep, but yeah, I think I can see it. I think a lot of, when you really think about it, you think about the experience as I'm terrible with names. Claire Augrey, right? Mentioned when you think about your experience, the concepts that you guys are putting forth really play to at least one person, right? and maybe I'm unique, but I don't think so. But yeah, I think you guys have already had a lot of great conversations, all over, mostly downtown, I'm assuming, but you're probably fanning out and hitting a lot of other places. It's going to be a long process. But what's next?
Well, we're at the Cube on Hartford Road tomorrow night for a community meeting. Those community meetings don't stop.
Right.
As we said, we'll go anywhere and we'll talk to anybody because we think it's that important. We are at the City Council next week, February 13th at 2:00. I think it's really important to understand that we engaged the community. We brought on a world-class design team, actually predominantly local. We should be proud of that, of our homegrown talent that's here.
Yeah.
Claire and her firm are on Maryland Avenue. Gensler's right across Light Street from the site.
Yeah.
All of our designers are here in Baltimore, except for 3 designers out of Copenhagen.
Right.
But I think that's something that we can be proud of, is this local team led by a local developer delivering on something for a local community. But we're still going through the public process that every other project has to go through.
Right.
That's the legislative process. That's the design review process. And then ultimately, and this is really important, the voters of Baltimore City get to cast their vote in November. And that was a huge element of what we wanted to do. You asked, what's the importance of the charter amendment? And the charter amendment is saying that we as Baltimore want to do this.
Right. That's a mandate.
And so, I think for us, that's the culmination of years of hard work of trying to get the property out of court-ordered receivership and have a judge order the sale. Kind of culminating with our hope is that the citizens of Baltimore agree with a vision for growth and a vision for the future. and cast their vote yes on whatever our ballot question ends up being in November.
Whatever the name of it comes. I love what, like, I want to be in the room one time when someone's actually naming their ballot initiative. It's always some name that has nothing to do, but it's always good. I like to go to the ballot box a little early just to read all the ballot initiatives and like the names, and then see what they actually mean. But it'd be interesting to see. But
one thing that I think we talk about it a lot, like it stops on election day and then the buildings are there sometime later, and there's a ton of work, important work that impacts your viewers, that impacts everyone in the city, that's going to happen in the interim. It's going to be building the right workforce development opportunities. It's going to be finding the right retailers, restaurateurs, the right tenant mix, the right local vendors, all of that, the right artists and artisans. And so there's a lot of work that's going to happen with the community over the next number of years before this thing is realized.
Well, great. I mean, then you can come back here anytime that you need to, and you can talk about whatever it is you need. What you guys are looking for from the community, and we'll do our best to distribute that message as best as we can. I'm sure all the other folks interested in town, media outlets, and everything else will be doing the same. But I can tell you tonight, we certainly appreciate you at City Voters Live for coming and giving us an opportunity to bring this information firsthand, to the people of Baltimore City. I just want you guys to know you're welcome here anytime. Like as I just mentioned, anything that you think needs to be disseminated, to this channel, we're happy to do so. So thank you for including us in your process of community engagement, and we look forward to bringing you back and just going through this whole process with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.